and I didn't grow up kind of in an entrepreneur mindset. And so shifting out of my W-2, that stability, a couple years ago, one of the key kind of parts of my financial foundation that I built to step onto out of the W-2, one of those was kind of covering my monthly burn, right? So I think about it as a monthly burn rate, both on the personal side as well as the business side. So looking at my family's monthly expenses, and when I was leaving my job, it was at least six to 12 months of family monthly operating expenses set aside.
Welcome, millionaires and future millionaires. You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, a show where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their portfolio allocation. Now to your host, Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 420.
This is the podcast where we dive deep into the inspiring stories of self-made millionaires from all walks of life. We are your hosts, Jason and Stacy, and each week we uncover the strategies, setbacks, and turning points that led these individuals to financial freedom. Whether you're just starting out or looking to level up your wealth building journey, join us as we share the secrets and wisdom from those who have built their fortunes from the ground up. Get ready to learn, be inspired, and take actionable steps towards your own success.
Listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with my dad, Jace Madison, and my mom, Stacy Madison.
Awesome. Today we've got a great guest. His name's Connor. He's got a net worth of $1.7 million, mostly in real estate. We get into a little bit of that and his career trajectory going from kind of the Bay Area tech world to a full-time real estate agent, short-term rental investor, advisor, etc. Connor's a great dude. He's in his early 30s, so on a pretty aggressive trajectory, but has done an amazing job. And I can't wait to get the episode with him. If you'd like to be on the show, send us an email, millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. We are definitely looking for some new guests to join the show, share their stories, and take a deep dive into all things Millionaires Unveiled. So with that, let's get right into it with Connor. Connor, do you want to just give us about your background and what you're up to now?
Yes, sir. Nice to see you, Jace. I am a North Georgia resident. I live in just kind of the border between North Metro Atlanta and the North Georgia mountains. Do real estate in a variety of capacities, and that's how I built most of my wealth. I've got a young family, a 5-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl, and excited to chat with you and share some stories.
Yeah, nice. And we're going to get into the details in your career in real estate because it didn't start there either, which is interesting. Quite the pivot and cross country and everything that goes with that. But before we do, what's your net worth today?
It's about 1.7.
Nice. And how is that broken up?
The large majority is real estate equity. And I've probably got about 20% in index funds and stocks, and then 20% in cash. I try to stay relatively heavy on the cash reserves, just given the size of the portfolio and how much expenses are flowing through the real estate business.
Yeah, so I want to take this probably piece by piece here because we've got a real estate heavy guy who actually is still investing in the market and has pretty substantial cash holdings, which we don't find very often, especially at your young of an age. So let's start with the real estate though. How is that broken up? Is single family homes, multifamily investments, or what is kind of the makeup there?
Yeah, so I'm mostly a short-term rental guy, so that's probably a lot of the direction the conversation will go. I own roughly a dozen properties, with most of them, about 10, being short-term rentals. A handful of partners in different rentals, but it's mostly North Georgia and Smoky Mountain, Tennessee cabins, with a couple of Florida properties and a couple of long-term rentals mixed in there as well.
Okay, so short-term rentals, which means you've got a business, I would assume, managing that as well. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So a lot of what's worked for me is keeping everything in house, and so I've got my short-term rental portfolio. My core business is my real estate sales business. So that's kind of the engine, the active income engine that I'm pouring into the rental portfolio, and then I also have property management in house. So I have a small property management company So I've been managing all my own properties for the last few years and managing for other people as well. But that vertical integration, keeping control of the portfolio, keeping everything tight has helped me be successful during a time when there's a lot of boohooing about short-term rentals, frankly. So yeah, it's working.
Yeah, so definitely professionalize the short-term rental game. You primarily on Airbnb or Verbo or one or the other? Do you favor?
That's right. Yeah. So Airbnb makes up about 95% of my booking revenue, which is a scary thing. You probably shuddering as I say that because there's some platform risk and dependency there. Verbo ebbs and flows, and I'm actually actively trying to get that to take a little bit more of the pie. And then there's a little bit of a direct booking strategy and some external marketing outside of those two platforms that I'm pushing as well.
Cool. And on the Verbo, is there any reason why it's that low, or is it? Do you think that Airbnb at this point, being a short-term rental guy, just has that much of the market share?
So I interact with fellow investors in the space. My brother is like 50-50 balanced, and we don't actually know why his portfolio of a few properties has kind of an equal balance between the two platforms, whereas mine's 95-5. And I know that's the case for I know several investors where the majority is Verbo, and there's not a great explanation. For me personally, I think just got momentum on Airbnb, and I started favoring the platform and started neglecting Verbo, and it just kind of snowballed and built, and the reviews built on Airbnb. And so my listings are on both platforms, but they're getting booked on Airbnb first before Verbo even has a chance. But yeah, it is a scary part of my business. And back to the cash reserves conversation, there's the occasional horror story of the Airbnb superhost or account that gets shut down without notice. And when you've got $100,000 a month of operating expenses and mortgages flowing through the portfolio that's dependent on those Airbnb bookings flowing through, it makes you want to have some cash reserves and be ready to pull some different levers. When you're that dependent on a platform.
Yeah, for sure. How do you think about that cash reserve? Is it a percentage of kind of what that business is costing or those expenses per month? Or how do you think about what makes you sleep at night having that kind of cash reserve for that business?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your take on this. I've always had this mindset of, and I left a corporate career a couple years ago. So I had a background in tech sales and had a nice stable salary with great benefits, and I transitioned out of that with two young kids, a brand new baby, um, and I didn't grow up kind of in an entrepreneur mindset, and so shifting out of my W-2, that stability, a couple years ago, one of the key kind of parts of my financial foundation that I built to step onto out of the W-2, one of those was kind of covering my monthly burn, right? So I think about it as a monthly burn rate, both on the personal side as well as the business side. So looking at my family's monthly expenses, and when I was leaving my job, it was at least six to 12 months of family monthly operating expenses set aside, and likewise on the business. As the business has grown, that number gets a little harder, and the family expenses too gets a little more challenging. But I do continue to try and push to have a year to two worth of cash reserves, especially in the market as of the last couple of years, like being in real estate sales and short term rentals. And just hearing about all the different macroeconomic headwinds and turbulence in the macro environment, it's made me be extra cautious and protect the wealth, so to speak, with extra cash reserves.
Yeah, I mean, at any given point, you could have a massive cycle in your income. I bet just because the real estate sales and the volatility of Airbnb and the cyclicality of it that may or may not happen in your areas. So totally makes sense. Do you keep that in like a high yield savings account, or is it just sitting in a checking account when you need it?
That's right. Yeah, high yield savings, some bonds and different things. I wouldn't consider myself overly sophisticated on that front. High yield savings account at 3.5-4% is I'm good with that. And I often think about the a lot of what that money is set aside for is relatively fixed in terms of, the mortgage payments being the bulk of that, expense that I'm trying to set aside for. That's not necessarily inflating and so in some regards, I feel like that 4% yield is sufficient to kind of, be covering that expense, despite inflation kind of hitting the business in different ways, right?
Yeah, and do you set is any of that kind of slated for CapEx, or what may be CapEx down the road too, or how do you think about that as part of the portfolio and the business of what may come down the road, and having to make, larger purchases, or AC unit goes out or whatnot?
Yeah, so that's part of the mindset of continuing to grow those accounts. So I don't feel like I to date I have not felt like I've hit some sort of threshold where I'm like, okay, we're good. Because in my world, in the short term rentals, it's not just the capex, like you mentioned, the roofs, the HVAC, the all the crap that goes wrong all the time. You've got like normal real estate stuff that breaks down and you have to replace, and then you've got short term rental wear and tear. That's another layer of linens and furniture and TVs breaking. I've got a cracked screen on a TV, and Adirondack chairs somehow just falling apart at the fire pit. All that stuff, and that stuff adds up. But then you also have this kind of this reinvestment budget where in today's short-term rental environment, particularly in the markets I operate, it's not enough to set it and forget it. I'm constantly looking every 6 to 12 months at reinvestment budgets and what new amenities, adding barrel saunas and more string lights and skee ball machines and more arcade games and bigger TVs and all these things that just keep that edge to continue to stay profitable in the short-term rental space. It's really about staying like at the top 10%, and if you're there in terms of kind of the competitor set, the profitability is there. If you slip and fall, there's kind of this widening gap between the haves and the have-nots in the short-term rental space.
Dang, 10%. That's crazy. So you're saying that, like, if you drop below that, the profitability starts to shrink so drastic that it's almost not worth it for you? Or how do you
It
think
feels
about
that
that?
way. It feels
Yeah.
that way in my markets where you go from bleeding money every month or breaking even on your expenses in kind of if you're just one of the herd, kind of the average Joe, to if you can get yourself up into that top 10% of options in terms of design and amenities and just your offering, there's still tons of demand for this type of travel. So even though there's growth in supply and options for people to book, if you stay in that top 10%, you're gonna continue to have kind of the exciting short-term rental cash flow numbers that people have talked about for the last 5 years. It's just getting harder and harder to do that, right?
Yeah, talk to us a little bit about how you think about ROI with all the investments and all the things that go on. I mean, when you're going to go buy a new property and you underwrite it, if it doesn't hit X, Y, what is that number for you? And kind of how do you think about that and acquiring new ones?
Yeah, so the metric I've been using is fairly simplistic. It's a cash on cash sort of evaluation. So it's, hey, we're putting $100,000 of capital into this cabin between the down payment, the closing costs, the rehab, the amenities, which is not atypical, by the way. That's like a 75 to $100,000 these days to really do it right. So a 20% cash on cash return sort of target. That's $1,500 a month in cash flow, roughly, right? 1,500 a month, and that's again kind of a simplistic analysis of the true ROI, IRR on a real estate investment, where you have the depreciation, the appreciation, the principal pay down. And so you have these other things that make real estate awesome and kind of transforming the net worth over time. But the cash, holding myself to that cash flow standard, is giving us a lot of meat on the bone to kind of weather the cycles. And so I found that as I've stayed really disciplined to buying and setting up high performing cash flowing short term rentals, has allowed me to like continue acquiring when everyone else is backing off, and then just come in with even better properties and reinvesting. And so I'm just like separating, getting more and more advantages and more cash flow through a cycle when a lot of buyers have backed out, and it's gotten harder to kind of find deals that make sense because you have to do it like top of the line to make it work, right?
Yeah. And is the financing similar where you can kind of get 20% down, get a loan on these, or do you get to this point now at 10, which I know a lot of people have that number in their head because it gets a little tougher, to continue to get loans without going kind of the portfolio route, or how does that kind of work in your world with the short-term rentals?
Yeah. So in my particular case, over the last couple of years, I've transitioned mostly to leveraging other people's money. So partners, I have a handful of friends or family members that have kind of become my capital partners that bring most of the capital and the loan, and then I'm bringing some capital and the operations and the expertise, and that's worked really nicely. So we've been acquiring ugly properties, making them pretty, stabilizing them into cash flowing short term rentals. We've exited 2 of those and had amazing returns over a 15 month span on 2 of them. And then the other ones we're holding, and then just kind of opportunistically selling depending on the partner's needs, and if the property is really annoying, which is something people don't talk about. But I've had a couple of properties where there's things that come up that you can't really figure out in due diligence, like if the neighbor just hates you or hates short-term rentals, or different intangibles that you can't really discover until you're 3 months into the property. So exiting when we can. But then, yeah, as far as back to your question about just the financing structure, because of the partnerships, I'm able to leverage, their lending ability. It's a lot of second home, vacation home loans, 10% down, and that is above board and not mortgage fraud if you do it right and make sure you understand the requirements there. And then I've also, dealt with bank statement loans and DSCR loans and different things like that for clients depending on the situation.
Cool. So as a real estate guy through and through, selling short-term rentals, got a couple other ones, 20% of your portfolio is invested in the market. Talk to us about that a little bit.
So as I was coming through um, my corporate life, I started my career at Microsoft. LinkedIn was the company I was working for, owned by Microsoft. And there was an amazing 401k match there where for every dollar you got 50 cents matched up to the IRS limit. And so it was guaranteed 50% return. At least that's how my dumb brain processed it. And so that just felt like a no brainer. Like I had to do what I had to do to make sure I got that guaranteed 50% return. And so for the couple years that I worked at LinkedIn, I maximized that. I took advantage of the employee stock purchase program, getting I think a 5 or 10% discount there, and just max that out. And funny enough, like when I started my career, I had a brand new baby. We had a new baby. Let's see, we moved to San Francisco. New baby 2 weeks later, and like 2 weeks into my job, basically. And and because of living in San Francisco on an entry level salary, it's funny the whole like entry level career income thing where my brother started his career 10 years prior to me at Google, and his starting salary 10 years prior to me was about the same as my starting salary 10 years later. And his stock grant was way better than mine. Uh so I knew going into that salary that I was in trouble because cost of living was just like, it was rough, man. Like I was all excited about this new job in San Francisco, and it was great. And I'm super grateful for that experience. But we were barely getting by. I would finish my job at Microsoft or at LinkedIn, and I would get home and I would get in the car and drive DoorDash after work to just kind of try to get an edge, and ultimately kind of fund my ability to max out that 401k match because I really needed that money just to pay our bills. But because of those types of sacrifices, driving DoorDash after hours and on weekends with my fancy tech job, I was able to take advantage of that, and just getting time. And like a lot of your interviews, you talk about just that compounding and time in the market. Just having $50,000 to $100,000 in the market early in your career in your 20s, and just letting that ride, that has turned into a nice little, nest egg and a nice way to balance out my portfolio. And I've chosen not to leverage that too much or hit that. I did actually use a 401k loan to fund my first short-term rental, which was super cool. That's like one of the best financial moves I've ever made and just an absolute no-brainer. But beyond that, I've left it untouched. And I've always found a lot of comfort in kind of having some exposure and diversification to the market in that way.
Did you pay that loan back already?
I just paid it off like 2 months ago. It was like a 5-year. It was like a 5-year loan at 3% interest. Paid to myself, and it's the best, cheapest money you could ever get, and it funded a short-term rental that has like totally transformed my life. That thing cash flows $3-4 grand a month every month. Yeah.
Wow. So when you see that, what is it about not touching that and doing something else with that money in the market into real estate when you've had that kind of return and that kind of outcome? And is it just that you don't need it, so to speak, yet, or don't need it now, or haven't needed it? I mean, why keep it in there when you're a real estate guy? Just curious.
That's a good question. There were definitely times where I needed that. I felt, up until very recently, felt very cash poor. Have felt very poor, and even though my net worth on paper was $1 million plus, because everything was just going back into the next real estate project. And but similar to how I have avoided over leveraging my real estate portfolio, I have multiple properties that are, say, 50% LTV or less, where there's hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity that I could easily tap through a cash out refinance or a HELOC. And similarly, I could go hit the 401k through a couple of different strategies and probably pretty comfortably get better returns in the real estate. But I've taken a slow and gradual approach to just scaling the portfolio little by little. I think, interestingly, the capital has not been the bottleneck as much as kind of the personal growth and the skills and the mindset to handle the operations of what I have now. And so I think if I had poured too much capital fuel onto that fire earlier, I probably could have figured it out and handled it. But I've been very happy with the pace and kind of just slowly and strategically and not over leveraging myself, built a portfolio that's super healthy. And now I think I could, these days I'm knocking down a deal every quarter, whereas for the first couple of years it was like a deal a year, and then it was a deal every 6 months, and now it's a deal every quarter. And the momentum like builds and the skills compound and the ability to do more faster. It just becomes like easier and something you can manage a lot better. So yeah, there were definitely times where it would have been nice to have a little more money in my pocket and have a little more fun. But we're starting to have fun now the last year or two. And so that's been great. And I didn't have to sacrifice like letting that grow too and have that diversification. And it's probably just a mental comfort thing mostly.
Do you keep it in the market going forward, or do you think you'll ever kind of self-direct that and move it into some real estate?
That's a good question. Maybe we'll have to have some conversations about what I should do with it. It's getting to the point now, at the risk of maybe sounding a little bit arrogant, but it feels like I have a lot of control over these real estate investments, where there's so much meat on the bone, where I now know how to identify opportunities, what needs to happen to add value, what the playbook is for making it a cash flowing short-term rental, and what it takes to basically create a return over the course of a year or two that's way better than anything I could get or expect in the market. So it is tempting to do that, and as I've kind of progressed, I've realized how much better real estate investing is for lifestyle and getting to enjoy the wealth building like now through the cash flow and the equity opportunities, compared to the retirement accounts, where it just feels like, I don't know if that's really going to matter. But yeah, so I'm still figuring that out. I'm 30. I'm about to turn 31 this week. So I feel like I got some time to figure it out.
Yeah. Do you keep adding to that market investments at all, or are you just letting it ride from when you had it previously?
I have added a little bit here and there through some like taxable brokerage stuff, but it's been super small because the real estate has just made, like, right now there's probably a dozen real estate deals that I would love to go after, and and so there's plenty of real estate to absorb the capital.
All right, good deal. Where do you go from here? Do you have a target net worth or kind of, number of doors, you talk about in real estate or properties that you're trying to accomplish, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, at different I was thinking about this interview. It's interesting, these podcast interviews, because it's a snapshot of me like today, like in the month of May in 2025. But if we had had this conversation in January, or if we have it in December, at least where I am in my career, like it's still pretty dynamic in terms of like what my goals are. And so right now I'm focused on this idea of just making sure that I'm achieving my full potential, first and foremost, like as a husband, father, and like follower of Jesus Christ, and recognizing that if I put in the work consistently and do a good job, and take calculated risks and continue to push myself, the net worth will just kind of be a byproduct. I flirted with different ideas of like a 5 to 10K number, or 5 to 10 million number, where I get to that number, and then the pressure just really comes down. But the more I listen to podcasts, the more I think that's kind of just a lie that we tell ourselves. So I think I'm more focused on continuing to lean into the work that I'm best suited for, and the things that God wants me to do, and letting the net worth just continue to grow. So I'm not really that preoccupied with what that number is, or where it gets to. I'm pretty optimistic that just because of the compounding of what I've already created, I'm in a really good spot. And if I just keep putting fuel on the fire, it's gonna continue to create opportunities to like bless the lives of my family and the people that I interact with.
Good deal. So I want to go back one thing real quick before we kind of wrap up with some rapid fire questions. What led you to take the kind of steps to leave tech sales? Great job, all the benefits, driving at night, making the extra cash, moving cross country, and essentially starting a totally different career path.
So when I was, as a young person, as a teenager, I don't remember aspiring to a lot of wealth. Like, I don't remember believing or thinking I would become a really successful business person or a wealthy person. I grew up in a nice, like, upper middle class area in life. But I do remember aspiring to be a husband and a father. Like, I do specifically remember like wanting to have a family and have kids, and I've always wanted that. And um, and so when I got to my job in San Francisco, I remember I had just started my job, just had a brand new baby, and I would get up. It would still be dark outside, and I was living in the East Bay. I would walk 15 minutes to the train station. It'd be dark at like 6, 7 a.m. So I wouldn't see my family. I'd ride the train into town. And if you've ever ridden the BART, that alone might drive anyone to make a career change. And then get to my job, amazing job, like the best company, people, opportunity you could want coming out of school. And then very social kind of experience. So a lot of long hours and events after work and things of that nature. And then riding the train home. And then it's dark when I get home, and maybe I'm catching the last 30 to 60 minutes of my son's day before he's in bed, sometimes missing it. And that last 30 to 60 minutes, most parents know that's not like the best, 30 to 60 minutes of a newborn baby's day anyway. And I just remember feeling like this feeling inside of me, like this is not me. This is not aligned with who I'm supposed to be and the life I'm supposed to live. And I consider that like God-given inspiration and intuition. And so it was a series of decisions and feelings and intentional kind of risk taking that took me back out to Georgia, where I'm from, investing in real estate, ramping up the real estate sales business on the side, and then and feeling like I had tailwinds at my back as I did those things, and recognizing that this was like the path, the God-given path that I was supposed to follow. And so it got to a point where it was just obvious that I had to kind of choose this path. I was forced to make a choice between the two. And I haven't looked back since. I remember before leaving my job that the fear of having to the fear of like not having enough income to pay the bills and having to go back to a job was like really overwhelming. I think that's a common feeling for people who are considering leaving their day job, is like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay the bills. And fortunately, I think for me, a little bit of luck and a little bit of whatever you want to call it has allowed me to really not look back in that regard at all, and just to be full sprint ahead, kind of pursuing this path and just trying to grow as a business owner and operator.
And when did you transition? When was that transition? What year?
It was 22.
Okay,
End
so
of
a couple years
22.
ago.
Yeah, 2.5, 3
And
years.
how long
yeah.
were you kind of doing both, do you think?
There was like a 2-year overlap, 2 full
Okay.
years. And so the last 4 or 5 years has been a lot of like 60 and 80-hour weeks.
Okay.
Particularly during that time, I was getting like physically unhealthy as I was transitioning from, because it was like 2 full-time things, right?
Yeah.
Right or wrong, that was just the reality of it. Yeah.
And what was your net worth when you finally called it quits? You remember?
Did
Did you hit $1 million by then?
I know in 2019 when I started my job, my net worth was negative 10,000 or something. Yeah, something bad. By the time I left my job, the net worth was probably 3 to 500,000, and so it's really accelerated from there.
And did you have a certain amount of liquidity at that point where you felt comfortable, like, hey, I've got these bills covered, like I'm good, like I've got this set aside, or was it more of just, hey, this other business is now taking so much time, I've got to just put all of it there because I can't do the 80 hours a week anymore?
Yeah, it was a mix of both. I like going back to what I mentioned about like a financial foundation. So I think for someone who's considering leaving their job, making sure that you put the right pieces in place to step onto a stable platform. One of them being cash reserves, like we talked about. So identifying like your monthly burn for your family and having something that you're comfortable with 6 to 12 months. I also had a HELOC open on a property that I didn't draw down from, but I had access to another, year or two of capital in the form of a HELOC that I could just hit at any moment. So I had access to credit. I think I even opened a couple of zero interest credit cards that was, $20,000 to $50,000 worth of credit that gave me 12 to 24 months of runway as well. And then I also had kind of the reserves in the index funds that if worst case scenario I needed to hit, I could do that. And then I also had a little bit of equity in the properties that if I needed to sell or do something, I could. And then the other big piece was, to your point, like the business had grown to a point and my career had kind of grown to a point where I was doing a disservice to both and I needed to get out of one and commit to one of them. And the business was stable enough with enough history and past clients and referrals and leads coming in that it felt like a very stable transition. So not everyone does that whole side hustle ramp to full-time thing, and for good reason, but if you can do it, it provided a very smooth transition out.
Yeah, for sure. So let's wrap up with some rapid fire questions. What's the most expensive pair of shoes or pants that you purchased?
Yeah, so I don't spend a lot of money on clothes. Probably my clothing budget per year is probably $500 to $1,000 a year most. And the most expensive pair of shoes is probably a $150 to $200 pair of Cole Haans. And I should probably say that quietly because come October, November, they're going to start hitting me with their targeted Facebook ads, and I'm going to buy another 3 pairs of shoes. So it's maybe not the individual shoe purchase, but like the volume of Cole Haans that sit in my closet that I barely wear. That's probably the issue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because they need to be Jordans instead of Cole Haans, but we'll get you there one day.
There's some Nikes there in there too. Yeah.
All right. What about the most expensive meal out?
Yeah, we like food. I think I heard you say that you travel around food, or maybe that was someone else. But I love good restaurants and trying good restaurants. But probably $300 to $400 for my wife and I, and then we like to like host people at our house a lot, and so there's probably been some Sunday dinners where we spent a couple $100 just to host everyone and have steak or whatever. So
Nice. What kind of grill are you using?
a really weak grill. I need to get a new one
You got to
actually.
upgrade your grill game. Bad question to
I,
ask.
yeah.
Say you're grilling steak in
So if anyone
Georgia. I'm like, all right, what kind of grills this guy got?
It's wimpy actually, but it's gotten me through, and I'm now getting good at grilling. So it's about that time to upgrade. So if anyone has any recommendations that they want to send me,
All right, all right. What about the most expensive trip or experience?
we just took our family on a Disney cruise, which was a lot of fun. That was probably 5-6 grand, and my wife and I are planning a Switzerland summer trip that'll probably beat that. I really liked what you said in a recent episode about I forget how you phrased it, but just the timing of travel and paying attention to like seasons of your life where that you can't get back. So we're in a season where we're approaching kind of that third kid, but we're in that sweet spot with the two kids that can travel, or we can leave them behind with someone. And so we're trying to take advantage of this little window of time before we kind of enter the next phase of our family growth. So we're doing some fun travel right now.
Nice. What about the most expensive car?
We just bought my wife a nice new SUV, full size SUV, and I hate buying cars, so we just bought a new one, and just we're done with it for like a decade, I think. Hopefully,
Did you buy it
yeah,
brand new?
yeah.
Pay cash or get a loan on it?
We pay cash.
Perfect. Nice.
Yeah.
What's a key lesson you learned from childhood?
I think a key lesson from childhood, I was fortunate that my dad handed me Rich Dad Poor Dad as a like 12-year-old, and I read that book, and I didn't really implement the concepts of Rich Dad Poor Dad until later in life. But a lesson that sticks out to me is this idea that like one conversation or one idea or one book, properly acted upon, can totally change your life. And so we're at any given time, we're not really that far away from a complete transformation of who we are. And so constantly kind of inviting opportunities for that to happen, by meeting new people or getting together with people that inspire us, having uplifting conversations, reading good books, is a practice that I'm trying to continue to just continually kind of reorient my life towards my highest potential.
Nice. What's the craziest thing you ever done to earn money?
When my wife and I first got married, we had basically nothing, and so we would flip furniture on the marketplace, and we kind of furnished our house that way. So our first couch, I think we got for free, cleaned it up, sat on it for a couple months, then sold it, and then upgraded. And funny enough, like our living room couch is still the last iteration of that, like a $300 couch that we still use and enjoy. So that
Furniture flipping. I've heard that a few
that
times.
was
I like
probably
it.
our scrappy one example of like scrappy stuff we did. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, driving at night, flipping furniture. It's awesome. What about how'd you make your first buck?
I had some friends that lived in a golf community, and we would go into the woods and pick up the dirty golf balls and then clean them up and sell them to the golfers on the cart path. And those were great margins. We did well.
That's awesome. How old were you when you did that?
I would have been probably 5 or 6, and some of those guys were a couple years older, and so they probably didn't give me a true third of the profits, but enough for me to stay involved.
All right. I've yet to see that playing golf myself, but hey, you
I
get a
think
few
we
of
got
these
kicked
guys
off the course pretty quickly, actually.
Okay. So you get people doing that nowadays. It's probably, I mean, at least here in Texas, there's lots of trees, so I'm sure there's lots of uncovered golf balls that need cleaning and returned, especially to the occasional weekender golfer like myself. But what's a closely held belief that you once had you recently changed your mind on?
I had to transform a frugality mindset. So I don't know if I could put it in concise words, but there's a mistake that a lot of people make, that they get married to this idea of frugality. Because if you're like me or a lot of people, you kind of come from not much. And so you're forced to kind of overvalue the dollar, the return on time, when you also have to consider like the return on hassle or the return on stress or the return on joy as you make purchasing decisions. And so that's been a transformation that I've been going through the last couple of years. And for many people, it makes sense to just focus on the dollar and make sure that you're optimizing for the dollar, because that's all you have to kind of focus on, and you don't have a choice. But a lot of people grow beyond that and don't recognize that they should be thinking about joy and impact and health and stress and hassle as they make expense related decisions. So that's made my life more meaningful as I've kind of intentionally found ways to spend where it makes sense.
How do you define success?
I define success as achieving your highest potential as a human being, given the resources and the time that you have. And that's a very personal and intimate sort of evaluation. And I think a lot about the parable of the talents. And I'm not going to read it or break it down, but the parable of the talents, and just recognizing what sort of gifts and opportunities and advantages you've been given, and then making sure that you take that and turn it into a lot more, and help a lot of people along the way. So I think at the end of your life, the question, how will you measure your life, that the title of that book is often kind of planted in my brain. And I think about, like, at the end of my life, how will I measure my life? And it'll probably be like the people I helped and the relationships that I have. So I try to act accordingly.
Any last words of advice for somebody who's just starting out on their journey?
I think something that separates me from an alternate reality where I'm still in my day job, and a lot of people who could easily be on the other side of the coin, is taking calculated risks. You got to take some risks. You have to step into discomfort and try things that feel scary and uncomfortable, but it has to be calculated. And usually there's a feeling, call it your gut, call it inspiration, that it's a path that you should take or a step you should take. And people don't act out of fear and miss out on a completely different life experience because of that. So take calculated risks and follow that intuition or that God-given inspiration.
Awesome. That's Connor with a net worth of $1.7 million. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Jace Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website, millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.